Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you want to see the show on your TV, so we talk about things musically. Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you're listening to Jams and Tea.
Welcome everybody to this week's Record Club episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we have gone on to Saoirse's recommended album this week. This week, formerly last week, but we had to push it forward a little bit. But this week we are talking about the timeless classic Carole King's Tapestry, which the 50th anniversary of this record is close to when we are reviewing it. Was last month. Yeah. Which is why Saoirse prompted to pick this. So tell us a little bit about what you think about Tapestry and why you decided to pick it for this record club.
Yeah, and also, like, how is it such why is it such a significant record generally, and why is it worth commemorating on its 50th anniversary?
Sure. Well, my relationship to the record is basically I grew up with it. My mum is a really big fan, and so it filtered into my life. It is worth noting that two of the backup singers on this record are Mary Clayton, who you may know did vocals on Gimme Shelter by the Rolling Stones. And also Joni Mitchell.
Really?
Yeah.
Who?
This
her.
This is a few months before Blue came out, by the way.
What a year.
Right? So I think that those two people kind of characterize the vibe of this record, and that it has the Joni Mitchell folk pop thing happening, but at the same time it is bringing in influences from there's an Aretha Franklin cover on this record, there's a Carole cover on this record, and it's just bringing in some of those actually like soul influences, that kind of thing, and it just has this really interesting, unique sound. It's up for a bunch of Grammys. And it's influenced a load of singer-songwriters who are influenced by that kind of music. Like Amy Winehouse was a big fan of this record. So basically, if there's a singer out there who's doing singer-songwriter stuff on an acoustic guitar, who are influenced by things like sort of R&B or maybe the poppier side of that sphere of music, or soul, then they probably owe a debt to this record.
Before you kind of get into your opinion, I just want to give a few more sort of stats on the significance of this record that I'm reading. So this is one of the 100 highest selling records of all time globally. It was a massive success. It won multiple Grammys, as you've alluded to. It was on the top of the US album charts for 15 weeks in 1971 and remained on the charts for more than 6 years. It had two number one singles, It's Too Late and I Feel the Earth Move. Both spent 5 weeks at number one on the Billboard Hot 100. It is ranked at 25 on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. And what's, I think, also worth noting about this record is that it came reasonably early in Carole King's career as an album artist, but it was actually released on her 29th birthday, and it was far from her earliest excursion into the world of writing music. Two of the songs on this record were actually previous hits for other artists, despite the fact that Carole wrote them. You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman was a huge hit for Aretha Franklin in 1967, 4 years before this record was released. And Will You Love Me Tomorrow was a massive hit for the Caroles in 1960, 11 years before this record was released. So Carole King had been writing music and contributing towards popular culture in a massive way a long time before this record even came out.
I think it's sort of worth saying that those two songs that she wrote for other artists, in my experience of life, I find that the Carole King's versions on this record have almost sort of surpassed the originals to become the definitive versions of the songs for many people, I think.
And when one of those songs was originally sung by fucking Aretha Franklin,
Yeah.
For that song, A Natural Woman, to feel Carole King through and through, and also to be such a definitive capstone on this record as the closing track, is no small achievement. The reason I labor how important this record is, and just in terms of music, is because I was genuinely surprised to learn just how massively important this record is, because I was not terribly familiar with Carole King before Saoirse brought her to my attention, and I did not realize until I listened to this album for the first time last year just how much of it I had heard through osmosis, just by growing up and having grandparents who listened to AM radio. Anyone who, I would be stunned if there's a human being on this planet our age who has not heard a song like It's Too Late in some context at some point in their life. And so I think what's interesting about that, and about records that are such classics like this, is that they can and run the risk of fading into the wallpaper of music history, and perhaps becoming so beholden to their influences that it can be easy to forget and perhaps not quite even appreciate the extent to which they're so interesting. And it doesn't, and the thing I think maybe is the reason why I hadn't heard of it, is that when I was kind of getting into music, I was and getting into this kind of era of music in the 60s and 70s, I was so drawn to the records that were really bold in the ways in which they were reinventing the wheel, and artists who were really doing stuff that was different and strange. And I think like an artist like Joni Mitchell, for instance, who throughout the 70s reinvented herself over and over and over, and so and such gets a lot more attention. And when we talk about general critically loved music than someone like Carole King. But while records like Mitchell's reinvented the wheel, a record like Tapestry is the wheel. It's the template. And it's not to say that there weren't artists and plenty of music that came before it that explored this kind of folk driven pop music. Certainly, there are plenty of artists. But Tapestry set a real template in a way that is perhaps really important, I think, to underline before we even talk about our opinions of the songs. It is sturdy, it's reliable, it's straightforward. It's a foundation for vast swaths of popular music, such that its reach is impossible to calculate. But that's not to say that necessarily we have to be falling over ourselves to praise this record.
Of course.
But I am curious to hear, I think it would be most appropriate, Saoirse. I know we normally say recommended people go last, but I think it would be appropriate if you talked a little bit about how you came to sort of experience this record and what the significance is for you and why you think it kind of stands out in the way that it does.
Right. Well, I think like the fact that this record came out in 1971 is worth noting, because when I think of 60s pop music and when I think of 70s music, there's like a very delineating line between the sort of approaches to lyricism and music on each of those decades in terms of what pop, maybe so rock artists are doing different things, but the pop artists were operating in a very specific way, I think. Like I was reading contemporary reviews of this record, and one author, I think for the Washington Post, I'm not sure, said that it would give female pop artists new tools with which to write by having increased emotional vulnerability on the record and by stripping back some of the instrumentation and production, because her voice is maybe a bit less polished than what some of the other records at the time was doing. And when do you think about that now? That sounds vaguely ludicrous, because pop music has been stripped back and stripped back and stripped back so much since then. But this is it, so this is like the equivalent to someone making a pop record by just sort of getting in front of their microphone and doing songs they quite like of the 70s, I suppose. But yeah, when I think about my relationship to this record, there isn't a point where I met it. It feels like my left arm, and that it's kind of always been there in my life, because it's just been such a sort of integral part of growing up around music for me. Songs like Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow, You've Got a Friend, So Far Away, It's Too Late. These are songs that were perpetually on in my house, in my car. And as a result, the somewhat straightforward and simple lyricism, whereas I feel like some people might look at it and find it vaguely simplistic. For me, the simplicity of the lyrics are what hold the real emotional power. And it's just been a case of going back to it, and it feels like an old friend to me. It feels like a blanket I can put on. It feels like hot chocolate I can drink that I know will be a simple pleasure. And that's not to say that these songs don't have an incredible amount of emotional nuance. A song like Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow is a portrayal of love that not even love, a portrayal of longing that even today still feels like it hasn't really been said elsewhere to me. That kind of story of like you have a one night stand and you think that someone's given so much of themselves to you, but you're so used to sort of being let down that you're wondering how much longevity is in this, even though you feel a great amount of affection for them and you feel like they've shown you so much as well. And when I initially went to this record in full, beyond just the songs I knew, something like the title track really leapt out to me as something unique on the record, the way that it uses like the idea of a tapestry to evoke medieval mythology as a metaphor for a really touching story and heartbreak has always really stuck with me, and it feels somewhat more sort of musically ornate than the rest of the tracks as well. Almost like proto chamber pop in a way, but before that was a thing. But then there are just bangers on the record. Like at the opener, I Feel the Earth Move Under My Feet. Again, like lyrically very straightforward, but the bass line and the piano line is doing so much work. It's so propulsive. You feel like the song is moving under your feet, like the soil of the protagonist of the song. Or something like Smack Water Jack, which starts off feeling like it's a song about sort of law and order, where you can't talk to a man with a shotgun in his hand, but then becomes a critique of the kind of men who will use law and order as an excuse to be violent and oppressive. And it does it all while being a fucking bop. Something like and yeah, it's just full of songs that really touch me. Like You've Got a Friend, which just, I love songs about friendship. I love them. And just songs that proclaim, I will be there for you. That is what I live for. The other thing I really want to highlight about my affection for this record is that as a songwriter, this album is a masterclass in building up demos, in taking a song that existed as an instrumentalist and a singer on one instrument and fleshing it out with a full band sound to sound polished and full. This album is a masterclass in that. Every instrumental choice feels like it is exactly the right instrument to put there, playing those notes to really flesh out the song. I don't know how much I sort of want to commit to talking about this record before the rest of you have your chance to say your piece. So I'll maybe pull back for now and come back when you've all sort of said what you think of it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think is interesting is like we're reflecting on this album 50 years after it came out, and I've talked a little bit about how it's easy approaching this kind of classic era of music at this point, 50 years on. It's easy to be drawn most quickly to the stuff that's the most edgy, the stuff that is the most gritty. Whether that's in terms of lyrical subject matter or just in terms of pure sound. But I think what's so refreshing about Tapestry is that it doesn't rely on that kind of attitude towards production to make it stand out. Like, these are songs that don't necessarily hit you in a way that feels aggressive or in a way that feels challenging, but at the same time have their own world of complexity to them and gentle detail that really, the more closer you listen, the more you're rewarded. I think of things like the ways in which the strings on "You've Got a Friend" sound downright theatrical. I love the swooning melodies of the title track and the way that they kind of gush and swing. The way that Natural Woman pivots from these intense emotional surges to the most tender vocal passages, these extremes that exist within the same world of the song, and really underline the intensity of the emotion that Carole's expressing, but also the fact that that intensity is linked to a kind of tenderness that's at the heart of what she's singing about. And it's so good, it's real kind of subtle stuff, that subtle songwriter stuff. And I think the more you kind of engage with Carole as a music in terms of songwriting, as opposed to being in terms of production or instrumentation, you're going to appreciate more and more. I think in particular, the first 3 tracks on this album are probably maybe the 3 best. Just certainly the most that immediately grabbing. That said, I do think there are moments on this record that appeal to me less and feel a little bit comparatively like filler, despite the fact that the songwriting is still good. I don't particularly care for Beautiful or Way Over Yonder. I think they kind of leave the first side of the record winding down a little bit in a way that I feel drifts too much, especially Way Over Yonder, which goes on for about 5 minutes. And I think that Smackwater Jack, I like the commentary that you've pointed out on Smackwater Jack. It definitely leaves me appreciating the song a bit more, but it feels a bit jarring and out of place coming at a particular point on the record where it does, for me anyway. But I really don't have much else to say either way. It's obviously a classic. Your enjoyment of it is going to relate to the extent that this kind of classic album appeals to you. But yeah, does anyone else have any kind of feelings about what it was like to approach something like this 50 years on, and how Carole's music sounds to you?
Well, Tyler, you actually said something that I completely sympathize with experience-wise when this began, is that you said you sort of absorbed this album through osmosis, because like when I looked at the album, when I finally sat down to listen to it, I was just like, yeah, I've heard I Feel the Earth Move, but I haven't really listened to the rest of these songs, I don't think. So I'd be hearing them like this classic record for the first time. And then I discovered that like I had this experience with Miles Davis's Kind of Blue also, was that it was a record that I discovered I had heard like through osmosis and through like movies and just like hearing songs being played in places. Like I had basically heard every single track on this album at some point in my life and was like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with that. Holy shit, why didn't I know that? And as a result, I'd compare this album, like, not obviously not sonically, but I'd compare it to Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, in that it's just like classic hit song, classic hit song, classic hit song, classic hit song, blah da 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 da, and it just kind of keeps going. And like Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, I enjoy fucking a lot of it and think most of it's basically the best. I love Carole's voice. I do like her songwriting is kind of simple on here, but it's also very hooky, which is why I think it works a lot, but it's also emotionally very honest. I do say maybe the one thing I'm not in love with is the structure of the album. I think ending on the "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman" cover is just a strange final note to hit on. I feel like it's maybe like ending on the title track just in my head makes a little bit more sense, I guess, but that's more of a direct complaint. But I think the sort of back-to-back of Beautiful and Way Over Yonder is like, I like both of those songs, but they both like, they're just sandwiched between 3-track runs that are like perfect. So it's like, damn, that sucks, man. That's it. I mean, I really enjoy them, but like Beautiful follows Home Again, which Home Again is a fucking terrific song. I do also think that like the soul influence can't be overstated. Like I had only heard the Aretha Franklin version of You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman. And it was strange because it was just like hearing, in theory, I guess, hearing someone else sing that sounds like it should be a disaster. Like it should be like, why would anyone want, like, you have to have some fucking balls to do something like that. And the fact that it sounded completely natural was just like, oh, well, goddamn, I guess she just did that. It's a very basic fundamentals album. Again, like Rumors, of it's just like, it's fundamentals, easy song structure, very like memorable hooks, very identifiable lyrics. There's a real emotional core to it. Like there's a persisting sense of intimacy throughout the record, that it's just like, yes, there's a lot of instrumental builds and some occasional hints at like a grandiosity, especially with the piano, but you never get the impression that you're like, it feels like you're in the room with Carole as she sings all of these songs. And it's just a very pleasant experience. I went on a little bit of a walk listening to this the other morning, and it was just I had a great time with it. It's basically the ideal classic album where you just go back to it and it's like, wow, this is basically as good as I've been led to believe it is. Dope. So yeah.
So just a note on the Aretha Franklin song is that, or it's just almost all of the song is just her with the piano. The backing only comes in right at the end, and it still feels huge. And I just think that's really impressive.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, I'll get into my thoughts then, because Morgan is eating. So, yeah, this kicks off with the very up tempo kind of I Feel the Earth move, and I think a lot of this album, I think, as this point has been made, feels very cozy. That's how I describe it. The instrumental arrangements, I think, especially the piano stuff, is really tight. Most of that is played by Carole herself. I think that's a very admirable quality. I think the mixing and production here are quite nice. It's the kind of record you don't need a lyric sheet for, because it all just comes through so clear, so well. And something that caught me off guard occasionally was when these records had some longer instrumental passages where she really lets the people who are in the band, who are in the bigger band, kind of do their own thing. And I enjoyed those moments. And I mean, personally, I found myself really gravitating towards a bit of the more somber stuff on here, like So Far Away and Home Again. I thought that stuff was all very interesting, as Tyler and Jake have both made the point of. Those first 3 tracks are just goddamn unbeatable. What really doesn't work for me is stuff like Beautiful, where I find the lyrics so sappy, it kind of makes me want to throw up. And it doesn't help that it's followed by Way Over Yonder, which serves as a massive roadblock for this record's flow and slows it down for me a ton. I do quite like the diversity in styles across this record. I mean, in regards to the musical influence, there's a lot of cool stuff. There's some more jazz-leaning stuff, some more soul-leaning stuff. I think that's all very interesting, very nice to digest. I mean, but yeah, quite frankly, a lot of the the songwriting, while I can definitely comprehend what it influenced and I can definitely appreciate what it does, I find it just really cheesy and kind of dated. And it wasn't, my experience wasn't aided by listening to some Leonard Cohen recently, where a lot of his writing I feel still stands as very sprawling, epic, dark, gritty. And this didn't quite hit that for me. And I get that's the point. I get that it's more of a pop record than anything, but I was still just I was just kind of unfortunately let down, I feel. I mean, I really did want to enjoy this record because I think the first 3 songs here pretty great. Last 2 also pretty great. The load in the middle not bad per se, but it really doesn't do a whole lot for me. I don't find it terribly engaging, but at the same time, I'm very readily willing to admit the influence, how important in music history this record was, even if it doesn't quite work out for me.
August, I can't believe you hate women. Fucking unbelievable. You're just a fucking misogynist.
Fucking hell.
The M in Jams of Tea now stands for misogyny.
Hey.
Well,
Hey.
It's having a trans person on. I knew that would be what would tip us over into misogyny.
You planned this. This is entrapment for August. Honestly, this is evil.
this is evil.
I set up this. I want to join this podcast specifically to stop women being able to compete in sports.
Yeah.
All right.
Tapestry is a bad album because Carole King is a cis woman.
All right.
Yeah,
Anyway.
sure.
That's a clip that exists now. Have fun taking that out of context, Laura.
Yeah.
Bold of you to assume I'm going to leave it in this episode.
Well,
You better.
August got called a misogynist even in jest and still walked away from that looking better.
It's hysterical.
Misogyny.
Yeah.
Bottom text. Fucking hell, now I'm really gonna get canceled.
There's nothing that makes me happier than hearing Morgan laugh while he gets caught off guard.
Carole King's Tapestry. Yeah, I had never heard this album in full before, and then I came up to it and I listened to it and I realized I had heard the album in full before, because of the radio, and I was like, oh well, I mean, it's all good. It feels very much in the vein of like the Jim Croce records, or even like the pre-Pink Moon Nick Drake stuff, where it's just very sort of, I don't want to say bare bones, but like it's like bare bones and lush at the same time. Just sort of pop folk songwriting, and I am a fan of that. Something else that kind of reminded me of, but this is sort of a retroactive sort of reminding, is Elliott Smith's XO, and obviously Tapestry is not as as that record is sometimes.
Pain.
But yeah, the sort of, again, lush, sort of emotionally forward nature of it really reminded me a lot of that, just in spirit. And that's all things I like a lot. And for the most part, this record is just like heater after heater. I do have to agree with the Way Over Yonder and beautiful takes that we've come across here, and that I just don't find them nearly as remarkable as pretty much everything else on the album. And I don't really understand why they're here, but just you know, my thoughts on this are not particularly complex. She just bangs.
Yeah. So
I do have one note I've realized in the course of you all reviewing this, and that may further contextualize my more lukewarm feelings to this. How you have all described, like, essentially hearing this, like basically having already heard this entire record without knowing it, and I cannot recall a single time I've heard one of these from any point in my life outside of listening to them here. Maybe not a factor.
Definitely a factor.
Interesting note. Yeah, thank you. I am.
Whatever you say, Zoomer.
It's been established. Bubba. Brother.
Okay, Zoomer, kick one.
Bro Dre.
I just want to finish up by saying there exists a covers album of Tapestry on which you can hear Rod Stewart cover So Far Away, Aretha Franklin cover You've Got a Friend, Celine Dion does A Natural Woman, and the Bee Gees do Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow? And I have heard that song and it is terrible.
Damn, I was going to say that Bee Gees was the only one you just said that sounded like it would be interesting for me to listen to.
Yeah. I think I would just simply rather not listen to Celine Dion sing Natural Woman. Possibly the least natural woman.
You make me feel like a natural woman.
Yes.
I really want to accentuate how Tyler simultaneously sounded nothing like her, but also perfectly evoked the feeling of listening to her.
I thought I sounded reasonably like her. My mum listened to Celine Dion a lot growing up, but I also realized
Lean Sion.
I also realized halfway through doing that. That I had kind of morphed into Barry Gibb a little bit. So
yeah.
Anyway, Carole King's Tapestry, 50 years on, it still bangs. Your mileage may vary, but it's hard to deny its place in music history. And it's one of those records that feels like it will feel just as old when it's 100 as it does now. It feels like it's been a timeless fixture of pop music, as we have evidenced, unless you're August, who lives in Nebraska, which might as well be underground.
Yeah, pretty much.
But, you know, now that we're in a landscape where its influence can be felt in things like Taylor Swift's folklore, for instance, we can perhaps appreciate even more than ever just how foundational it is to music culture. Favorite tracks and ratings for Carole King's Tapestry. I fucking just about said Carole King's Folklore. Carole King's Tapestry. Jake.
My three favorite tracks are Home Again, So Far Away, and Will You Leave Me or Will You Love Me Tomorrow. Least favorite track, probably Way Over Yonder, and I give the album.
You give the album.
Well, it's funny.
What do you give the album, Jake?
I said an 8.
Okay, didn't hear you.
I guess it didn't hear me.
Tyler made a goofy face, and I just found it funny.
I have a goofy face.
Favorites. First three. Least favorite.
It's Goofy.
Way
From
Over
McDonald's.
Yonder. 5.5 out of 10.
Morgan, favorite tracks and ratings.
You make me feel like a natural woman. It's too
Thank
late.
you.
Will you love me tomorrow? Good one. Least favorite, beautiful, 8.5 out of 10.
Nice. All right. So my least favorite track is unfortunately Beautiful. But my favorite tracks include It's Too Late, Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow, and You Got a Friend. And shock surprise, I'm giving it a 10.
Okay, my favorite tracks are It's Too Late to Apologize.
No.
Tyler, I was gonna do, when I said my least favorite was Beautiful, I was gonna go, "You're beautiful.
Oh God, worse.
You're beautiful. No. It's true."
Yeah. So there's that. Also, favorite tracks. On
really, you're gonna give me that attitude after what you just did? All right, I see how it is.
Also,
wait a yes and dickhead.
Also, want to shout out "You Make Me Feel Like I'm the Only Girl in the World" by Rihanna.
Hold on.
Bangers. Straight up. Though.
"Natural Woman" by Carole King.
Have you lost the ability to speak?
Third favorite track on this record is "So Far Away." Least favorite track on this record is "Jumping Jack Flash" or whatever that one is called. Smackwater Jack. And I give this album
fucking idiot.
I give this album an 8.5 out of 10. I'm thinking that this Carole King might have something. She might be She might be onto something with this folk music thing. We'll see
so
how
that's
it pans out.
This is an 8.1 out of 10. Same as two records, No by Boris and Searching for Former Clarity by Against Me. Two very different records.
Yeah, well, if we say no to Boris, we say yes to Tapestry.
Boris, just say no.
We did say yes to Boris, though.
That's true.
Say yep. So let us know in the comments below what you think of Carole King's Tapestry. Is it a masterpiece? Is it a bit overrated? What are your favorite songs on Carole King's Tapestry? What do you think of the legacy of Carole King's Tapestry? And yeah, just let us know your general thoughts, feelings.
August looking like a Death Grips EP.
Next week on Record Club, it's my recommended record. We're going to be delving into the world of 90s acid techno with Orbital's epic records, Insides, which I'm very excited for you all to hear. And considering it's a record that I heard has been in my life since I was literally fucking 3 years old, I'm very excited to talk about. So yeah, stay tuned for that, and yeah, go check out our main episode if you didn't see it this week. We actually reviewed a metric fuck ton of records. We reviewed the new Arab Strap, we reviewed the new King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, we reviewed the new Tiger's Jaw, and we reviewed the new Ad Nauseum. So none of those records sound anything like Tapestry, so you may not care about any of them, but you should go and watch the video anyway, because we talked and it was fun.
In Jams and Tea World, metric fuck ton equals 4.
On that note, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Uber, move the way you want.